How you doing, guys? Today we'll be looking at the evolution of the Greek governments, specifically looking at the Athenian government and how it progressed to the democracies that we know of. I recommend taking time to pause, rewind, making sure you get the notes down for this. I will be highlighting a few points, but I'll be moving pretty fast through this. So before the reforms, you had the monarchies, and during this monarchy time, you have the establishment of archons. The archons were the upper class elite, the aristocrats. They were the wealthiest land-owning families, and because of this, they wield a lot of power within government. And once that monarch is discontinued, you now have the archons having sole control over the government. It was hereditary, so it was the same families, and this now has a major impact on the lower class, and the lower class are looking for some type of. The four men that we'll be looking at and reformers are Draco, Solon, Peisistratus, Cleisthenes, and Pericles. We will be looking at the reforms when it comes to government, economic, and social. You may use this chart to jot down a few notes to organize your notes. Again, I recommend doing that as we move. So started off with Draco. He was an archon. He was also known as the lawgiver. He was his influence was from 622 to 621. His major influence is he writes a new constitution. His constitution is significant because he establishes the Council of 400. With that, all men who could supply their own arms and military were allowed to vote. So this is actually coming off of that hoplite revolution, where the military has a major impact on the rights of citizens and also the influence of citizens in politics. He also provides laws that are very harsh, punishable by death, most of them. He also implements debt slavery, where poor families, if they could not pay their rent or they went into debt, they could end up being sold into that slavery. His name is now used as an adjective, draconian, meaning harsh. If your name becomes an adjective, you know you've had an impact. Also with Draco, his economy was agriculture, and it was a barter economy. He didn't really have a whole lot of impact on the economy. The major impact was on those small farmers, the tenant farmers. If a tenant farmer, or if a farmer went into debt, a stone pillar called a horos was then placed in his fields, and everybody would know that he would be in debt, and then eventually sold into slavery and become that tenant farmer for the much wealthier aristocrats. So during Draco's term, the aristocrats gain a lot of power, which then causes a lot of turmoil. This then allows for Solon to take control. Solon's influence stretches from 594 to 561. He is not in power during this time. It's just he is a major player within the government. His reforms are not completely democratic, but it gives more opportunity for the citizens to participate. He still allows, since he is an aristocrat, he still makes sure that the aristocrats have. He breaks the society down. You have 3 classes that can now serve. He actually creates 4 classes. The lowest class cannot serve, the thetes, but the 3 classes can take part within government. They can serve as a jury They could pass laws. They are the assembly. Now, the upper class still maintain power, and that's one of the big things. But it's giving that power, that feeling of power, to the lower classes, that it kind of eases. The four classes that he has, you can see them down there. You have the upper class, the wealthy. They are the only group eligible to hold office of Archon, so he maintains that. The hippies, no, not those hippies, as the hippie bus is going by. They are the men that provide horses, so cavalry. Again, you can see the link between military and politics. You have the men who are wealthy enough to equip themselves as hoplites, and then finally the lowest class, they are just the manual workers. We will see how this is comparable to many of the civilizations we already talked about. With the economic reforms, he does allow for better opportunity for the lower class. He establishes his economic reforms, also known as the shaking off of burdens. It decreed that debtors could not be enslaved, so he ends that debt slavery that was implemented by Draco. He also limits the amount of land a single person can have. So does take land away from those aristocrats, but again, they still have power within the government, so he's still making sure they have that. He also borrows the idea of a currency. Over here on the right is the coins that could have been used at the time. And then with that, it now allows for better trade, and now exporting olive oil and pottery. Athenian pottery is now a major commodity. And this now allows for people to pursue professions outside of farming. So with that, you now have specialized jobs, you have artisans and merchants popping up. This is going to bring a lot of wealth within Athens. Peisistratus then takes over. Peisistratus is a tyrant. Little story about Peisistratus. The picture on the right, or on the left, I'm sorry. He is banished, and while he's in banishment, he gathers a couple followers, and he rides back into Athens in a white chariot pulled by white horses with a very tall woman dressed as Athena. And he says, Athena's got my back. She says I should be ruler, and the people believe her, and they then make him the ruler, a tyrant. So that's politicking right there at its purest form, because people are not going to question if she's a god. Back then, if she said she was a god, she was a god. So Peisistratus had power to implement new government reforms. Because he was a tyrant, he tolerated no other political party except for his own, but he did increase and allow for equality among the citizens, especially within taxes. He taxed everyone equally, which then impacts the wealthier classes, which had tax breaks. He also allows for the loans to be cheaper, so that people can take out a loan, and then that would then spur the economy. He also has an aggressive foreign policy supported by trade. He calls for the trade, and especially of olive oil, and again, bringing that money into Athens. He also calls for many public works and beautifications, obtaining fresh water. He provides an aqueduct. And Peisistratus then calls for the building of many gardens, so the beautification. The major economic reform, though, aside from introducing those loans, was encouraging farmers to grow the cash crop, or olives. Because there was such instability, people were afraid of growing olives, because an olive tree takes about 10 years to produce fruit. So because he allowed for a stable government, they were now willing to produce that and then use that as a major export. So with that, he carries on what Solon had put in place of the major exports of olive oil and pottery. And this just highlights the trade routes, especially with the Greeks and Phoenicians and their colonial trades. So olive oil and pottery now make their way all throughout the Mediterranean, carried by the Phoenicians, and this now influences the cultures around the Mediterranean. With this social reform, as I said, he is more for the beautification of Athens. He does implement the Pan-Athenic games. They're midsummer games similar to the Olympics, but strictly for Athens. So he really unites the Athenians under one rule. He brings them all together. Next, you have Cleisthenes. Now, Cleisthenes is unique. He really only wields power or influence for about a year, but it's significant. Little something about Cleisthenes: he was kicked out twice from Athens. The first was he was actually kicked out by his own dad, which is kind of a shame. The second time he comes back in, and he's then ousted by a political competitor, along with 700 families, known as the Accursed. And there you go. They're walking by. See you later. He's exiled. That was actually Leo Tolstoy. We'll talk about him later. But anyway, so exiled, kicked out. But because of the turmoil within Athens during his second exile, that now allows. And once the Athenians call him back in, he then allows for these reforms to be established. He creates a government that is known as the demos, a system of government that is of the people. He does implement ideas of direct democracy, although this isn't strictly a direct democracy. That isn't actually implemented until later on, but he lays the groundwork. A general assembly is formed with all free Athenian men, each having a vote. They met regularly, and that now allowed for the government to be more regulated and established. He also puts into place an area for that meeting. That is a small hill next to the Acropolis, where the General Assembly will always meet, so they now have a meeting place. He also brings in the Council of 500. He breaks the meeting of the Council of 500 from the 10 tribes, the Greek tribes. So each tribe selects 50 council members. They're chosen by lot, so it's not like they have to run. They're actually it's a lottery that you're chosen into it. So every man could experience it. They remain because they're duty bound by their city and they're representing their tribe. So they're not going to be. They're more willing to stay there and not wander off and not take it seriously. He also breaks down and renames the people. They call them the Deme. They are the village, and because people identified themselves such as the village of their village and not as Greek, this caused a lot of tension. So what he does is he actually renames. So he names each tribe after a legendary hero, but then he calls the people to identify themselves more from their area, but actually they take their tribe name. So, for example, Democrates from Marathon. Okay, they're more likely to identify themselves. So, by changing that idea of how they identify themselves, it actually unites the people more, so that they would do more for Athens. and more for the city-state. And this is just a breakdown of the tribe delegations for 1 year. So this is what they all had the amount of men they had to dedicate to that. He also implements ostracism because he was exiled himself. He knows what it's like to be kicked out. So what he does is he establishes the idea that the assembly could call for an ostracism. They could then vote on it. This was implemented to make sure that one person wasn't going to take too much power, or a group of people weren't going to take too much power and too much influence. So ostracism is now put in place. Now the deal is, if you are ostracized, you do not lose your rights and you do not lose your land, your property. You just have to go. And the way that ostracisms were called out or took place was you etched the name of the man to be ostracized on a piece of clay pottery that was broken, and there were broken pottery all over the place. So you just etched the name in there, put it in, and they then tallied the votes. And if you were the winner, you had to. The last man we'll be looking at is Pericles, and we'll be looking at him a little bit more in depth when we cover the golden age of Athens. But he is more known for being a general. That's actually why he's always wearing, or depicted as wearing, a helmet, is because he made a name for himself as a great general. Now, when he comes to power following the Persian War, he implements a direct democracy. He has an Athenian assembly of over 6,000 members. Those members then acted as juries. They made the laws. He actually is paid, he pays them so that they can focus strictly on doing their job as a elected official and not as having to worry about harvesting the crops when it came time to it. He implements the trial by jury. 500 men served, and he also carries on the idea of ostracism, where you're banished. Citizenship. This is one of the big things he does. Is he restricts citizenship. Both your parents have to be from Athens, and not just your father. So this actually gives a lot of power to women in Athens, a lot of influence, because your mother also has to be an Athenian citizen, native Athenian citizen. This was also very controversial because his wife was not. His wife Aspasia was foreign-born, and she has a lot of influence in Athens at the time. But he makes this call, and it's also retroactive. It takes into account previous citizens, and as it states down below, a review of the citizenship rolls was conducted to expel anyone who had claimed citizenship fraudulently. So it was retroactive. So that was a major. You also have voting. Now, again, it was very limited to who a citizen was. The list there are guys that are not citizens. So that only a citizen could vote. So even though it was a democracy, it was very limited democracy. Now with the Delian League, this is his socioeconomic. He uses a lot of the money from the Delian League that is established after the Persian War. He then uses it to build the Acropolis up. He builds, of course, the Parthenon. He brings in the greatest artists, sculptors, and by bringing those guys in, Athens becomes the hub of Greek culture. He also builds the Piraeus, the port fortifications, which protect those the ships, but it also causes the downfall because when he goes into that defensive stance during the Peloponnesian War, this now locks in the plague. and causes his own demise. So your assignment, compare these philosophies to the Chinese philosophies that we've looked at before. We will be doing this tomorrow, so